Thank you so much. Thank you, Archbishop and Rabbi Klein. Actually, I know Ali Chaudhry. I just wanted to mention that. I just saw him in New Jersey recently when I gave a talk, so we have friends in common already. One of the things that I think really struck me, and it's very simple, but really important, is that the memory of most Syrian and Iraqi kids is just war and trauma. So there's no real sort of look at something that was before or after. And I think that's a really important thing in terms of looking at the future generation and children, and how are we going to even offer children something to look at when they were already being born in Syria when the war broke out, or are now 5 and have no other memory but the war. And the last and final thing I want to say, because I'd like to hear from all of you, is that I think one of the major issues, and this is on a practical note, when the UN Convention came up with the Refugee Act in 1951, there were some Muslim countries, there were 26 that agreed with it, but the rest did not sign off. And a lot of them are, Saudi Arabia and other countries like Syria. But the countries that signed off on this Refugee and Asylum Act were all the poorest countries of the Muslim world, which is really something to take note of, right, in terms of that. So for example, the Rohingya crisis today, most of them are trying to escape to one of the poorest countries in the world, Bangladesh. In 2001, when the US invaded Afghanistan, the north of Pakistan, my country of origin, didn't have borders. It has borders today. So there were migrations in Waziristan going back and forth, and honestly, it was okay. That was fine. And all of a sudden, in 2001 and 2002, there was a wall that created more of an issue, actually, for Pakistan than most people, because of illegal migration all of a sudden of Afghanis or of the Pashtun tribe or these people. So I want us to sort of think about, are we going to just deal with migrants, or are we going to look at what it means to create sort of divisions, because we're still in this imperial mode of creating borders, fences, and nations, which goes against what the Archbishop was just saying, which goes against what the Rabbi was saying. And if you are to accept the stranger, then aren't we strangers to ourselves? Thank you.
We keep talking about research, development of information, collecting data, compiling data and everything. And we do research in order to research again. And we do meetings in order to meet again. And we hold tons and tons of beautiful meetings like this in order for us to dialogue with each other. We have dialogues in Mr. Kofi Annan, interfaith dialogues, ideas. Let's talk, let's really see what we can do for the world. We already compiled the biggest data about every single thing that we have. The only problem, don't you think it's time for us to move into implementation of what we have compiled over the years? We had World War I, World War II, we had several wars after that, and we are still compiling data, and we are still looking into research. We already have all the data we need. Don't you think it's time for us to move into implementation of solutions we already founded? Thank you.
Well, I think if you work to the UN, like me, you would be bored if you have 6 meetings a day. Anyway, I think certainly it's also true. That's what so many delegations also say about about this insistence and continue about amassing or accumulating or gathering data in order to know more. But I think both are correct because, I mean, there is no end to knowing what we are doing. Even we collect data on implementation so that the next time around our implementation would be better. I mean, just like the Millennium Development Goals, we had how many objectives did we have there? How many goals? Only 8. Now we have 17 with the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. So the research actually of what was being achieved and what were the failures of the Millennium Development Goals, that's 15 years from 2000 to 2015, actually became also the basis of what is now 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. So both are true. I mean, there is just so much meetings. There are, there will be 2 big summits in the first part of December. There will be the 24th Conference of States Party to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, which will be in Poland, in Katowice, from December 2 to 14, so that's 2 weeks. And then there is, of course, the summit or the international conference to adopt the Global Compact on Safe, Orderly, and Regular Migration in Marrakesh, Morocco, also December 10 and 11. So in all these meetings are, we always say we are just as the start. These big documents that will be adopted during these times are products of research of what we have done so far. And then we are at a new start of trying to implement, trying to learn from what we have learned from those past implementations. In most cases, we have phrases of the United Nations that we practically beat to death. And one of them is, after evaluating implementations, we always say, much has been done, but much still needs to be done. I think it's true in everything. And then outside, I think that it is a continuing, we might say, wheel of implementation, of researching into how we did with the implementation, and then trying to get better in another wave of implementation, and then having a new agreement or having a new convention. And just like, Convention on Climate Change, that's 24 years. So these are 24 years of trying to evaluate what we have done and where we have failed. And I think that's really, the saddest thing really is what you said. When we just keep on inventing meetings, we just keep on researching, and then we just keep on putting them in the drawers. I remember, I would mention one country, that's Haiti. I was papal nuncio in Haiti for more than 6 years. And there was, one of the fundamental problems of Haiti is education. So there was a series of proposals: World Bank, International Monetary Fund, United Nations studies, tons of them. And then the earthquake happened, and then there was another big study put up by an American researcher, financed by the World Bank, on how to reform the educational system in Haiti. So all this, nothing has been implemented, nothing has been done. All these research recommendations have been put in the drawers. But the last one, especially the one after the earthquake, was very good, I should say, because it really had very, very good, it was promising. But it would cost Haiti more than $1 billion a year. Only in the first 5 years, it would have costed $5.6 billion. And Haiti has a budget of around $55 million a year for education. So what are we going to do with that? Very good research, very good recommendations, but no means of implementation. And so that's where really is the tragedy you are referring to, I guess. Thank you.
I would echo your concern, and the purpose of prayer is not to get done with the prayer. The purpose of prayer is to move heart and soul to change. Abraham Joshua Heschel used to teach that prayer has to be subversive. You have to emerge from your prayer someone different than you began. when you began the prayer, because having read the pages and sung the hymns or whatever, if you're not with some deeper understanding of what's needed in this world in terms of greater celebration or more effective work, then you failed. And I think that every organization in this world can be accused, rightfully, of meeting for the sake of meeting, and sometimes to avoid doing the work. If the more we're meeting, the less work we actually have to do. But if we approach what we do as prayer, then you have to, when you finish the conversation, you have to take some formative step to implement whatever it was that you prayed over or you met over. Certainly the need for research is huge, because sometimes you don't know. You can create bigger problems by diving in to solve a problem where you don't understand what's really going on. My congregation just launched a homelessness initiative. Now, the blessing of my congregation is that they don't know what homelessness is. Everyone is well off. So the first year is to grow empathy and understanding, and that's to start serving in kitchens and to deliver collected goods and to start conversations and spending the nights at the shelters, so that next year we can start the work of advocacy, but understanding what it is that we're doing. So it's not an either or. I think even when you're at the beginning of problem solving, there's hands-on experience that you can gain and do something productive while you're trying to figure out a more effective solution. And I think that your criticism of many organizations, not just the UN, is well founded. That sometimes we wait until we think we have the answer before then we implement, or with respect, as what was happening when you come up with a $5 billion solution in a country that you know before you even started doesn't have near those resources. So how much time and energy and resources were wasted in coming up with a solution that completely is improbable and impossible? I think we need to better focus on why we meet and what we expect to get out of it.
Okay. Quick question. Thank you so much for this wonderful panel. It was really great. And so much to comment on, but obviously we don't have time for that. But to the last commenter's notion about implementation, I agree, and I can only say that I know Dr. Sonera mentioned this last night, and I certainly don't pretend to speak for him at all, but the idea is to absolutely move beyond talking and to do concrete action. And I know the people in this room represent institutions around the world that have tremendous manpower, brain power, and financial resources that can be put to good use. I'm not trying to say that they can immediately mobilize them, but it would be a loss if we didn't move from here to actually networking and connecting and helping people with information dissemination, connecting people to programmatic things that help, or also scholarship that can help as well. I agree. But I would, if possible, to just make a comment on Dr. Afridi's wonderful comments. You mentioned that this is I've done a little bit of research on it, a little bit of writing on this. This is a Muslim problem to a certain degree. And you say we should try to help, which I think the goodwill of everybody here clearly would speak to that. You say it's an inter-family problem. My little bit of research into Islam is that it is enormously complex, and that we don't, and also that we don't understand the West, certainly the United States, we don't understand it at all really well. So how can we help on that? In that, with what seems to be in some ways somewhat of a family problem, because I think we have people with tremendous goodwill who also have fears that have been stoked wrongly in many ways, but how can we help?
Yeah, I mean, I think what I'm saying is an internal Muslim issue. I mean, if you look at Syria, you look at the players involved, we're talking a different kind of scenario. I'm not saying it's a Muslim problem. I would never say it's a Jewish problem or a Christian problem, so I want to stay away from that language. But what I think I'm trying to say is that as a Muslim, I'm taking responsibility to understand that there is a crisis. I think that's the first step in a lot of ways. The second step is to define the crisis, right? And the third, and this is within, I'm not talking about the UN and I'm not talking about implementation. And then I think the third step is to sort of look at how to solve things. For example, Angela Merkel took in 1 million refugees, mainly in Berlin. And I remember going there right after that. And there was a complete panic in the city, because that's a lot of people in a city, period, right? And of course there was a little backlash, but I went to visit some of the refugees, and they were grateful to be there. But not only that, they were helpful. And they were helpful because they were put into this area that was sort of residential. And because they were put into a government building that couldn't house enough and didn't have enough bathrooms, the city put out porta toilets, right? And they felt embarrassed because, you know, there were doctors and lawyers and engineers, that these toilets were put in front of residents' homes. So they made an initiative to go and talk to the residential people and say, is there anything we can do for you? We're so sorry about this. And from that, there blossomed a community of, you know, local Berliners and Syrians. So what I'm trying to say is that when you allow for this implementation of 1 million people to enter, it's not always negative, right? There's always this positive stories. And I think if you allow the local public, say if someone comes from the outside, to actually get to know what we call the other, it's a different story. So I think the fear is where I started my talk, and the bridge. But we have to stop being so fearful.
And I have to apologize, I have to be on the pulpit in 2.5 hours at the Jersey Shore. So if you'll please forgive me, I have to leave. Please continue the conversation. I'm honored to have been here.
Wanted just to add one final question. Thank you. So if you look, yesterday I commented on our objectives and on the 3 words in our logo, and there's one word which is missing, and you may ask whether it's because, you know, we like to do things in trees, but what's missing there is advocacy. But I think it's also missing because it's maybe the more difficult thing to talk about in a university context. So certainly universities, okay, we have voices in universities who are very clear that universities have a social responsibility in their part of civil society, and they should be speaking about a number of issues, even hot topics in politics, and others are afraid that universities might become polarizing if they become too political, or that they might lose their standing as a rigorous and authoritative voice in society if they start speaking in favor of migrants and refugees or other issues which are politically very sensitive. So the Pope doesn't have any problem pushing Catholic universities and also inviting other universities into doing advocacy for migrants and refugees. But, you know, I don't know what you think about this. How do you feel about this? Obviously, I can imagine university presidents and even in fundraising having a bit of difficulty sometimes speaking with the kind of people who donate money to us, who may not be always very much on the same page with what the Pope or what we as educators may have to say on this issue. So there are tensions on there to explore and to resolve. I don't know, just wanting to see to what extent does advocacy make universities political, and is there political in a good sense that we should fight for as academics?
Thank you. There are certainly different levels of advocacy. Of course, whether advocacy becomes a political question or not really depends on what you're advocating for. And for instance, we as, it's not only Catholic Church saying this, but it is really, for instance, one of the things we pushed, I'll give you examples of what we did with the Global Compact. One, of course, the most fundamental, some of the fundamental, really the big points that we really try to push forward. One is the Holy, that the migrants must be treated and respected. The fundamental human rights of migrants must be respected. I think there would be no controversy on that. But the Holy See and some other delegation were really pushed for an itemized enumeration of what are these basic services that should be provided to migrants regardless of their migration status, that since these needs flow from their fundamental human rights, from their human dignity, and therefore could not be denied to them. What are these basic services? I think advocating for that is and then you go to, we might say more, there would be some differences as what are these basic services specifically? And that's why the Global Compact has not, there was no consensus, especially the wealthy countries. Europeans were very much against enumerating these basic services. But there are two objectives there that say that no migrant should be denied basic services, access to basic services. So without specifying what are these basic services. So it is the interpretation of what these basic services are, partly is left to the policy makers in each country. But partly it could not be discussed, because really the most fundamental services that must be given, that must be provided to migrants or refugees, no matter their status, migration status or refugee status, whether they're already acknowledged or recognized as a refugee or not, these services can be done because this flows from the international humanitarian law. That's why if somebody asks you what happens in those countries, what happened to refugees and migrants in those countries that do not or will not adopt the Global Compact, because the Global Compact is not legally binding, and many countries have already signified that they are not going to Marrakesh, not even for tourism. So they will not accept, they will not adopt the Global Compact. So what happened to the refugees? The Global Compact really, the heart of the Global Compact is that it is a framework of basic practices and a reminder of what is the responsibility of everyone to migrants, regardless of their migration status, according to their international obligations, according to their obligations under international law and international humanitarian law. So that it could not be controversial. On the other hand, the Holy See delegation, we pushed for the banning of detention of child migrants as never in the best interest of the child, according to the Convention of the Rights of the Child. So that is more controversial. I mean, there is no international agreement. You could not call or appeal to an international humanitarian law, nor to an international law, or not even to the Convention of the Rights of the Child, that detention of a child migrant, child detention must be banned. So we did not get that, but we are still happy with with the language of the Global Compact on Migration. It says that countries are asked to find ways towards banning child detention, and that detention must be considered as a last resort in treating migrants. So I think that there is the other thing that we push is the explicit reference to the principle of non-refoulement. Because you see, the principle of non-refoulement is that nobody must be sent back to where they come from. If such sending back would endanger their lives. For instance, if they would be imprisoned there, if they would be persecuted, or indeed if they would be killed because of who they are. So that is an international customary law. You cannot reject that. However, the controversy there is that whether or not the principle of non-refoulement, which is explicitly used in the Geneva Convention and the 1907 Protocol to the Geneva Convention, could be used also in the Global Compact for migration. That was to be questioned. Countries like Pakistan, Lebanon, India, and many European countries, they were explicitly against. He said, if the principle of non-refoulement is applied to migrants, we will not accept this Global Compact. So what was done as a compromise is that the very definition of the principle of non-refoulement is explicitly in the Global Compact, but not the term non-refoulement. So it's a compromise, that's diplomacy. So if you push for that, there will be other people who will find it controversial. We don't think that migrants are protected under the principle of non-refoulement. So it really depends on what you advocate for. If you advocate for, I'll give you an example, Lebanon. I mentioned explicitly things that, sometimes it's not diplomatic to mention specific countries or people or places. But Lebanon is not very happy with the policy, whether it's of the United Nations or of the World Bank, which provides programs, education to give refugees in Lebanon or in Jordan education, skills, etc., jobs, which should help them support themselves, because he said this would encourage them to stay. He said that the best way to help these migrants would be to try to build, infrastructure in their country of origin, Syria, so that they would be encouraged to go back. So these are really, it depends on how you look at it. If you advocate for university education for migrants in the United States, that they would give them scholarships, that would be controversial for many. And yet we know, personally, that would be good. So I think these are really important, I think, considerations of advocacy. And I think the Holy Father has really referred to all this as important to integrate and to promote migrants, even regardless of their migratory status. Take care of them health-wise, provide them opportunities to earn money. Sometimes that might be too difficult because that means the law. That means labor laws. But I will provide them really possibilities that they could be integrated, that they would feel at ease in their host communities. That is why I always insist that when it comes to integrating and making migrants feel welcome, is that community level activities are so important, and of course it must be complemented with legislative measures, because community activities could be declared illegal or could be discouraged by law, so they must also be promoted, fostered by legal measures. My response is very long. I could go on and on, but I think that's all. Thank you, Father.
Yeah, I'll be very brief. I know everyone, it's the next program, right? So I just wanted to say that we're talking about, I work at a college, so we're a Lasallian Catholic college, and I think most of our advocacy comes from our mission, which is for social justice, dignity for the other, inclusion of the other. So I don't think there's much of a conflict there for us. I think that one of the ways of advocating is also trying to understand what the differences are, and I think that can get you to a different place too, right? So you may have maybe talking to someone that has a different opinion on things, or has a fear of the immigrant, or doesn't know how to deal with it. It's really not, I think it's really important to get them in the room with you, because it creates a conversation that you wouldn't have normally. And the last thing I just want to say is that in the Quran and also the Hadith, in terms of basic services, you were saying the global contact, there are 3 basic services that are indicated in Islam. 1 is shelter, 2 is clothing, and 3 is food. You must provide that. It sounds very simple and basic, but it's actually written, and there were jurists that actually came up with legal laws between the 12th and the 14th century to advocate for people who didn't have anything in countries if there were minorities. So it's interesting that some theological documents could help, facilitate this kind of question of what are basic needs. How do we do that? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Obviously, I have a number of things to say on this. There's a document from 1969 of the Congregation of Bishops called Nemo Est or De Pastorale Migratorum Cura, which has this list of the rights of migrants. So that was 49 years ago. I think that's...
You're on this ahead.
So this was the year of Paul VI. And obviously, however, a lot of people wouldn't even not only know this document, but some of the stuff in the major encyclicals of Catholic social teaching, even guys who are in the administration of some of our colleges and universities. So I think we also have a commitment to educate the people whom we're working with about what it is also, because this is also an aspect of what a Catholic, or in our case, the university should be looking like and should be thinking of and should be holding there too. Thank you. Let's move to the next item on our program.